Hey, everybody, welcome. If you don't know the individual that I'm with today, I'm here to introduce you to him. This is Jason Kander, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Jason. There's a lot. There's a lot. And if you don't know his story, I hope that you dive into it because it's pretty amazing. Jason joined the Army after 9/11. He was an intelligence officer and he works on corruption, espionage, and drug trafficking cases. In 2008, he was elected to the Missouri House of Representatives. 2012, he was elected as the Missouri Attorney General. 2016, because he's not done, he ran against the sitting U.S. Senator and barely lost by about 2 or 3 points in a state where the other Democrats lost by about 16. So that goes to tell you how Missouri appreciated Jason. Shortly thereafter, he founded Let America Vote, which was dedicated to fighting voter suppression. This has now been joined with End Citizens United to become the largest pro-democracy political advocacy group in the nation. In 2008, he explored a possible presidential run with motivation from President Barack Obama, but instead chose to run for mayor of Kansas City in 2009. And all of that led up to a point, Jason, one, welcome, but where you kind of settled in, you're running for this mayor for this mayor position in Kansas City, widely expected to win. And then suddenly you stepped back. And I think it's important to talk about that and the kind of things that you have done to support veterans at this point. But one, welcome. And then two, if you would, we would love to hear about that.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so in 2018, you may remember that there were at least a couple dozen Democrats running around the country with the intention of running against President Trump in 2020. And I was one of those folks. I had been fortunate in that President Obama had taken a liking to me. He had said so publicly. His last Oval Office interview, actually, they asked him, like, who gives you hope for the future of the country? And he was nice enough to name me, which is like a real boost in your standing when that happens.
Sure.
And then he invited me to come out and visit with him in DC. So I spent some time with him in his office, and we talked about the prospect of me running for president. And so that's what I was doing. And so I was running all over the country, spending a lot of time in New Hampshire and Iowa, a little bit in South Carolina. I hit 47 states as a headliner for events inside of about a year. And should have been really enjoying it. I mean, I had been in politics by that point for 10 years. So you can imagine where that would be sort of a real zenith moment for me. And it was professionally, but personally, I was dealing with a lot of untreated trauma, but I wasn't really admitting that to myself yet. So I had, as you referenced, I had served in Afghanistan as an intelligence officer in 06, 07. And I had been the sort of intelligence officer whose job it was, in addition to analyzing intelligence, but also to go collect intelligence. So to go out and I always describe it as figuring out which bad guys were pretending to be good guys. My CO over there referred to the work I did. It was sort of a slang term, thug int, meaning thug intelligence. Like he said,
Absolutely.
my job was to go out, build relationships with thugs, and get information about other thugs. And so I had told myself the story that what I was doing didn't really count, because it wasn't the conventional version of combat that we saw in the movies growing up. But I was in a whole lot of rooms, just me and my translator, where nobody knew where we were, with some pretty unsavory characters who, in order to go get information about bad guys, you got to meet with some not very good guys. And, I got very good at counting exits and all that kind of thing. And that had a cumulative effect on me that I denied for a long time. And so by the time I'm getting ready, well, I am basically running for president. I just had not legally invoked the words "I'm running for president." I said things like, "I'm seriously considering it." I just kept seriously considering it while giving speeches in Iowa and New Hampshire. By that time, I really wasn't sleeping at all. Hadn't really slept a good night's sleep hardly at all, about a decade at that point. And, had a lot of the other symptoms people have come to know. Really struggled to be in a crowded place, or like in a restaurant where I couldn't see the door. Was increasingly, at home at least, becoming volatile, not physically violent, but the stress was becoming really, really high at times when it didn't need to be. Felt in danger a lot. I could go through all this stuff, but
Yeah.
came to the realization right as it was just about time to announce the presidential run officially that something was wrong. Wasn't yet willing to admit to myself what it was. And then made this decision that made sense at the time, which was, well, what's wrong is I'm not able to see the progress I'm making in the world. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to become mayor of my hometown. I'm a fifth generation Kansas City and I love my hometown. And so I decided that's what I was going to do. So instead of president, I announced for mayor, which was a surprise to a lot of people. And that campaign should have been so fun. I had state legislature, secretary of state, senate. I'd been in these campaigns. I'd never been anything but the underdog ever. And here I was. I went from running for president to running for mayor of my hometown. As you might expect, I was very much the front runner. And that should have been a blast. But I just kept getting worse and worse. And my suicidal ideation started to become a little louder in my mind. And that scared me. And so I actually ended up calling the Veterans Crisis Line. And it was the moment where I heard the voice of the woman on the other end of the line talking to me. And it was clear she was speaking to me no differently than she had spoken to anybody else in that job. And that was the moment where I really finally admitted to myself that I wasn't any different than anybody else who had called. And it was time to accept that I had post-traumatic stress and go get help.
Yeah, one, thank you for that. I think it speaks to a lot of people, myself included, who have dealt with PTSD and dealt with depression to hear someone speak out about those things. Because there's been a lot of, I think we've gone through a period of time where speaking out of those things, wasn't considered strong or masculine. And I think that we're slowly starting to shift to the point where the strength comes from understanding, that there are issues happening in here, there are issues happening in here. And so you vocalizing that and then what you've done for that has been impressive. And so thank you for that. The voices in the head, right? Like when you talked a little bit about, the clutter and the noise and the constant self-defense and checking exits and all of those things. Did you feel like you were on a daily basis kind of like wearing a mask to appear functional and get through the day, and you honestly didn't even really know all the stuff that was below the surface? You knew, but just not the depths of it?
Yeah. One of the things about getting to a place of post traumatic growth, having gone through PTSD therapy, is that I look back and I'm like, oh, wow, life could have been like this that whole 10 years.
Yeah.
Particularly, it's true for every. I mean, we all have to some degree a public facing life. If you just have a group of friends, if your coworkers, whatever. In my case, it was maybe a more pronounced example of that because I was running for president.
Sure.
So I referred to some people talk about putting on a mask. I think of it as I was wearing the Jason Kander suit, and so I appreciate what you said. Those are nice things about me going public about it. And I will give myself 50% credit because 50% of the reason that I was public about it was to help other people. But honestly, the other 50% was to give myself the opportunity to stop wearing the Jason Kander suit because it was exhausting. And so once I had decided that I was going to go and get treatment and try to get better, I didn't know much yet at all because I hadn't been to therapy. But one thing I had figured out was it was going to be really hard for me to do that if I was pretending that it wasn't happening and that everything was fine.
Yep.
And that really I gave myself permission to not be okay and to have other people know that I was not okay. And that just took a little bit of a load off of me. I also, something else you just mentioned about, I agree with you. I think we have come a long way in terms of people, particularly vets, understanding that it is not a sign of weakness to get help. And I feel like we should give voice to this other obstacle that we don't talk about much that keeps vets from getting help. And I think was a huge one for me because I never really struggled with the idea that there was something weak about going to get help, just because I had a supportive family around me and I had been really involved in veterans issues as a politician. So I had, many times said there's nothing weak about going to get help because I knew that's
Yeah.
what you're supposed to say. So I believed it. I think one of the big things that held me back and holds a lot of us back is that the military does an expert job of brainwashing us. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way. And I
Right.
don't mean this as a criticism to the military because it's a necessary form of brainwashing. From the moment that we step foot off the bus at basic training to the moment we render or return our final salute, the military teaches us every day in ways big and small and implied and overt that what we're doing is no big deal. And the reason that the military does that is so that we can do things that are really hard or really scary. If I had bitten the apple of knowledge and understood that I was going into rooms that, I knew I could have my head cut off in these rooms, but if I understood that this was not normal and that if I understood that like it was actually combat and it was a big deal, I don't know that my legs would have kept carrying me into those meetings, right?
Sure.
So the lie I kept telling myself, because the army taught it to me, was I'm just a jerk who goes to meetings. And
Yep.
it wasn't until I was sitting with a clinical social worker at the VA who said to me, let me get this straight. You went to the most dangerous place on the planet. You went outside the wire, often in street clothes, with just you and a translator. Nobody knew where you were. You were entirely vulnerable. Nobody was coming to help you if things went bad. And you don't think you're a combat veteran and you did that on a regular basis. I had to give myself permission to switch off the brainwashing that the military had done, because they do a great job of it. But what they don't ever do is flip the switch off. And nobody ever sits you down and says, okay, now that it's over, you should know that's some crazy shit. And you probably are
Yeah,
going to
and we
need
need
some
to talk
help
about it.
because, yeah, human beings aren't supposed to do that.
Right. 2%, the population join the military, and what a small fraction of that, see combat or go into situations like that, right? And it's the same with police officers, same with firefighters. Like, you're throwing yourself into periods of danger where you're surrounded by people who do that all the time. And so it does kind of diminish that, I think, in your perspective as far as what you're
Absolutely.
actually doing, because it's a day-to-day thing. But there's no getting away from the fact that it exacts a toll on you psychologically, emotionally, in all sorts of ways.
I always say that even if what you did is nothing compared to what your friends did, if you did two things, it changed your brain chemistry. Now, I'm not a clinician. This is just what I believe. If you, on a semi-regular basis, mentally and emotionally prepared yourself to be in the kind of physical danger where your life would end, while mentally and physically and emotionally preparing yourself to take another human being's life, if you're doing that almost every day, you're not going to be the same person. And if you are,
You're not,
you should go get help because you were jacked up before.
right? Something was wrong with
Yeah.
sauce. Um, that this could be an entire conversation just about PTSD and depression and reaction to that, and the limbic and the cognitive and all those things that happen in the brain chemistry. Holy shit! But you've got a lot of story, and so after that, you then you have this meteoric rise. You take a step back to take care of yourself, take care of your family, to focus on other people, which is the exact right thing to be. And all the respect to you for having the courage to do that, especially as somebody who's potentially running for president. I think a lot of people would have just sallied forth and continued to break internally. But you made the right call, and you worked on yourself and you worked on family. You started a expansion project, and I don't know if this was before or after, but you worked with the Veterans Community Project. So obviously working with a lot of veterans and taking care of them, homeless, at-risk veterans, helping them with tiny houses, villages, support services. In 2021, after we withdrew from Afghanistan, there were countless people who had assisted us during that conflict who were left behind. And we've all seen the horrific images, of the airports, Kabul. But you chose to not just watch that happen. You chose to do something about it. And, what came forth was Operation Bella, named after your daughter, where you helped organize a group that I believe were able to rescue about several hundred, 300 to 400 risk of being killed, interrogated by the Taliban. And I know this involves a wedding of some type, but I couldn't really find the details of it. And I would love if you'd walk us through that story a little bit, because one, thank you for saving the lives of hundreds of people. But I think that's just absolutely fascinating that while a lot of us, were back here, or the administration was kind of sitting on their thumbs, you went about doing something about it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's the biggest, most important thing I've ever done. If people want the full story, if you go to YouTube and look up 60 Minutes,
Yep.
60 Minutes Jason Kander, 60 Minutes Afghanistan wedding, that kind of thing. There's there's like a 20-minute, 60-minute story about it. But so here's what happened. Like a lot of us, I became very close to my translator Salam while I was over there. Salam just was a rare bird in that because he was born in the United States to a diplomat father and then immediately went back to Afghanistan, was raised in Afghanistan. He was actually an American citizen. So he had no trouble, getting out. He had left Afghanistan a few years prior. But as Afghanistan was falling, Salam and I were talking, and he was telling me about his nephew Rahim. And his nephew Rahim had been the head of payroll services at Afghan International Bank, which is not, you wouldn't immediately think, well, that guy's going to be in a lot of danger. But as the head of payroll services at Afghanistan International Bank, he was doing the payroll for all of the organizations like the UN, the US Embassy, all of them, who were employing all these Afghans who were trying to help build democracy. And the Taliban knew that. And they had been, even before they took back over, had been harassing Raheem for a long time. They beat up his brother. They tried to kidnap Raheem. They did a bunch of things to try and get Raheem to turn over that list. It's like 100,000 people who had helped the coalition. And it's exactly the people that the Taliban wanted to make an example of by killing or otherwise disappearing. And he refused to give up that list. And so then when the Taliban took back over, Raheem was in a lot of trouble, and they were hunting him. They had, I think, he had received 3 night letters, which the last one was a death sentence for his entire family. And this was at the time a family of 12. He had triplets and also another daughter, and then he brothers and sisters and everybody. So there's 12 of these folks, 5 of whom are little kids, and they're on the run from the Taliban. So Raheem and I start talking, and I was like a lot of vets at that moment, just trying to figure out how to get him into the airport and failing. Um, and and then I put up a GoFundMe, and then a whole bunch of other vets who had families over there came out of the woodwork. And the next thing I knew, I was sort of the de facto leader of this ad hoc group of people who didn't really know what the heck they were doing. And then the last planes left. There were no Americans left in the country, and it seemed really hopeless. And against my better judgment, I promised Raheem we were just going to keep working until we figured it out. Hooked up with another guy who had a link to what had been basically the national airline of Afghanistan, which was pretty well grounded. And we came up with this crazy plan that if we could raise enough money, we could get that airline to fly back out of Qatar and land at the airport up in Mazar-e Sharif, because nobody was going to land at Kabul at that point. And maybe we could get these people out. The problem, well, there were many problems. The chief problem was that getting someone out of Afghanistan who the Taliban was hunting for after the United States military had left and there were no planes, literally no planes taking off in the country, was like the most lethal game of capture the flag ever. Because
Yep.
if the Taliban were looking for you and they found you, they were in charge of the country. They could, you were never going to be seen again. But if you had a plane ready to go and you had a visa cleared flight manifest to go to another country and you presented yourself at the airport. Now, if they catch you on the way to the airport, you're toast. But if you show up at the airport and the Taliban government has received a list from another country saying, we're expecting this plane to land and these people to be on it, you've captured the flag if you've made it inside the airport and that's happened. So we had to do a bunch of shit. The United States government at that point was not letting anybody else into Al Udeid. So we had to keep it a secret from them. We had to defy them because they had said no to us. We ended up working with the nation of Albania, but we had to stage a few hundred people in one place. And so what we came up with was a fake wedding in Mazar-e Sharif. So we faked a wedding, and then for 4 days, it was not supposed to take that long. People were sleeping in the wedding hall. And then we moved him into the airport, and the whole capture the flag thing worked. We got him in there, and then that worked, and they flew him out to Albania. They spent 2 years in Albania waiting to be approved, and they were being vetted. And because that had worked so well, and because we had raised so much money for it, we ended up pulling it off several more times. We started this thing called the American Rescue Project, and
Yep.
the people of American Rescue Project ended up getting out around somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 Afghan allies out of the country. So the end
Yeah.
of that story, by the way, is that my translator's family, so Raheem's family, came here to live in Kansas City, where I live, and we see him all the time. We'll have dinner with them again this Saturday. They were over here. There's 14 of them now. They were over here for the Super Bowl on Sunday, and we made fajitas. They'd never had fajitas, so I taught them how to eat fajitas. It was real fun.
I think they live just down the road, right?
Yeah.
Not too far. So I have a question that just kind of popped up. Is that project still ongoing? I know there are still people stuck there. Are there any kind of like remnants of that ongoing?
There are some remnants in that American Rescue Project is now doing things to try and help our Afghans who we got over here with, various resettlement stuff, some of their needs. Frankly, funding at this point
Yeah,
there's not much of it. But the biggest problem is that unfortunately, it took us a while to get the Biden administration to do the right thing,
sure.
but they eventually largely did. And they had a program to keep bringing people over. At first, we were having to do it as sort of cowboy vigilante stuff, but eventually American Rescue Project and a bunch of other orgs worked directly with the State Department, and we got a lot done. When Trump came in, he shut down the refugee program entirely, not just for Afghanistan. So there are tens of thousands of people who served with the United States who are still in a lot of danger and are in hiding in Afghanistan, some
Yeah.
actually in limbo between here and Afghanistan, who are not being let in and have no shot of getting out of Afghanistan or getting into the country right now. And that really needs to change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wish I could say that it was going to change under this administration, but I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah.
And with 3 years left, yeah, I don't know. You would love to be able to do something for all those people who are still there and who supported folks like you and me in staying alive. And I guess it's just another one of those things that's a casualty of the Trump administration, both administrations, if you will, where all these people are just kind of left behind in various ways. USAID, Afghan translators, people in the United States, you name it.
Yeah.
So you do that. You are rescuing people from Afghanistan, the American Rescue Project. You're not done. You're still not done. You are a best-selling author. You have an award-winning podcast. What is the future looking? What is the present right now? And then what does the future look like? Are politics still somewhere in the future? Is that a consideration, or do you kind of like this side of the fence? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it depends on how you define politics. If it's activism and speaking out and advocating for things, then I'm still in politics. If it is making it your profession and being on a ballot, well, then I'm not currently in politics.
Yeah,
And I try not to sound cagey about it. The best way for me to answer the question is just to say that I spent 10 years either in office or running for office, and I accomplished some things. But since I stopped doing that, I have played a role in saving the lives of thousands of people. And, on the Afghan stuff, I'm not like trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying like this
yeah,
is what I was able to do not in office. And on top of that, as you alluded to, I got to lead the expansion of an organization that I would argue saves the lives of our fellow veterans every day. And now it's growing across the country. Both of those things are a greater impact on the world than anything I ever did while there was a title next to my name.
sure,
And so for me, the threshold for choosing to run for an office again is pretty high. It would have to be a situation where I would say, there's a change in the world that I want to make, and I feel only I can make it. And I feel that I can only make it if I win this office.
right,
Maybe that'll happen one day, but it is genuinely not a thing I think about. And I don't mean, politicians say all the time, I'm not thinking about that right
right.
now. I just don't think about it. And my life I'm really enjoying it right now. I've accepted the idea that I've earned the right to enjoy it, which I hadn't for a long time. My kids are 12 and 5, and they're great. My wife is amazing. We've been together since we were 17, and we're really enjoying, seeing each other. And, when my kids are older and don't want to hang out with me, if something comes up where I say,
Right.
this is really what I need to do now because this is the only way I can really make an impact, then obviously I'll consider it. But it is not what animates or gives direction to my life.
Yeah. No, it feels like you've taken these moments away from public office, not that you're going back, to be a force multiplier in a lot of ways and to have tangible, impact on people's lives throughout, and just using your voice in different media and, in different projects. I know one of the events we kind of touched on, or one of the projects that you worked on, we touched on a little while ago, was the Let America Vote and End Citizens United combination. I know there's a lot of trepidation for people right now coming into the midterms, especially with this administration, about will the vote matter? Will we be able to vote? And Bannon talking about ICE at the polls and, people worrying about the National Guard coming in. Those things I tell people all the time are not going to fucking happen. But it's one of those things where it's the fear tactic of trying to suppress the vote, one of many, not just in legislative actions with, people trying to take folks off the voter roll, but the fear of voting or just the apprehension that their vote won't matter. What would be your advice to people as they look at 2026 and they do have this fear and they do have this apprehension about voting? What would be your advice to people about what they can do, and then also the situation that they're walking into when we talk about the 26 midterms?
Sure. Let me tell you what won't happen and let me tell you what Trump can't do and what I think he might try to do. So I'm the former Secretary of State of Missouri. So I was the chief election official of the state. So I've been in charge of elections for a whole state, and I have some insight as a result. First of all,
Yeah.
voter rolls are physically kept and maintained at the local level, not even the statewide level. A Secretary of State cannot change who you voted for, even if they want to. Now, I'm not talking about just legally. Like, even if they wanted to conspire to do it, they could not do that from their office. They could not take your name off of the voting rolls from their office. That is handled by the local elections official. And in some states, that's the county clerk, and some they call him the recorder. But it's almost always a county level, usually elected position or appointed position. And that means that elections in this country are very decentralized. And in situations like this, that's a really good thing. Now, that is why Trump is saying things about nationalizing elections. It's why he wants to get a hold of the voter rolls for all these different states, because he wants to get in there and try and say this person should be kicked off, that person shouldn't be allowed to vote. It's also why he's throwing around the idea of trying to get the Congress to change the law to give the federal government the power to actually change the voting rolls. I don't think that they're going to do that. There's no indication that they are. John Thune, the Republican leader in the Senate, has said that he has no interest in that. So I don't think they're going to be able to do that. And people should, feel better about that. Now, what I think they will try to do, they will put out a lot of misinformation about the election to try and scare people away from voting, to try and make people think, like the election's on a different day or at a different place. They will try to put barriers in place to voting. And I do think that in some instances, they will probably try and create physically intimidating aesthetics at the polls. They may, use ICE. They may try and do stuff by federalizing the guard. But they're not going to be able to do anything that will actually keep a registered voter from walking in and voting. And I'm not saying he's not going to try. He's looking at the polls, and he would love it if there were no election in November. But there will be an election in November. And also, people should take this out to its logical extreme. Let's say he gets everybody who's dutiful to him at the local level to say, like, I'm going to mess with the voting rolls because you asked me to, or we're not going to hold the election. That's going to happen in places where his voters are. You're not going to have blue states and blue places going along with that. And so that's why I think ultimately, without major changes in the law, which aren't going to happen, he's just not going to be able to achieve that.
Yeah. No, I think that's going to help a lot of people, especially coming from your position as an attorney general in charge of elections. So we appreciate that.
Secretary of State, you mean?
Secretary of State, yeah.
It's okay. You would be surprised how many people do that.
Secretary of State. So I am looking down the clock, and this conversation has gone on so well. I've already busted our time. I know I only had you for a short period of time, but yeah, I would love to talk to you about a lot more things down the road if you have the opportunity, especially about like if you're still a center fielder for like a semi-pro baseball team.
Semi-pro is generous, but yes, it's I would say rec, but it's wood bat baseball. A lot of guys who used to play at a high level. I am not one of them, but I do work very hard to stay in the lineup, and it is a blast.
Right. Well, that's outstanding. Jason, thanks for being here. Thanks for everything that you have done, everything that you are doing, and everything that you are going to do. Really excited for you and your recovery and steps away from PTSD and handling that and recovering that for you and your family. It's been amazing. So yeah, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for everything you're doing with this platform.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
All right.